Okay, why don't we get started? Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining. We're so excited to share this information with you today. By the way, this is our first workshop, so please forgive any technical glitches, also known as human error. I'm sure there'll be a few, right, Janine?
Probably.
So for a little housekeeping, we will answer questions at the end of the presentation. We encourage you to use the Q&A button at the top to ask questions throughout the presentation, but we'll answer those at the end. And by way of introduction, my name is Ken Taylor. I'm a marketing consultant, entrepreneur, writer, and speaker. In my corporate career, I managed a portfolio of products from the Coca-Cola Company, and I was the brand growth strategist for the Victoria's Secret Pink brand. I've been consulting now for the last 4 years, and my clients range from technology startups to multinational corporations. I've worked with companies in many different industries, including retail, CPG. Let's see here. There we go.
There we go. There we are.
There are pictures. So as I said, I've worked with companies in many different industries, including retail, CPG, food service, healthcare, and various technology sectors. Janine?
Well, I'm Janine Janot, and we got to the technical glitches pretty quickly there.
Yeah, there we go, right out of the gate.
I'm the owner of The Balanced Student. I'm a college instructor. I do writing and speaking as well. My educational background's in psychology, and for about the past 20 years, I've been working with students and families in lots of different settings. And for the past several years, I've been teaching psychology courses at a local university. Most recently, I started academic consulting business, The Balanced Student, and I'm doing that really to help our overwhelmed and stressed out students understand themselves better and to learn some strategies to help them reach their academic potential.
So why do we create this workshop series? Over the last 20 years, I noticed some of the best, most qualified people simply don't live up to their potential. When big opportunities arise, they just don't capitalize. Now, why is this? Because in high-stakes, high-pressure situations, they're simply not at their best. So I reached out to Janine to understand why, and over the last 3 months, we put together these tools and techniques to help people access their best selves in high-pressure situations. Let's get started.
Great.
All right, high-stakes, high-stress situations are the gateways to success. Think about your own personal experiences and feeling pressure from a high-stakes situation, whether it's a meeting, presentation, could be a sales pitch, certification exam, could be golf or tennis, right? Anything high stress is what we're talking about today. So what did it feel like? Were you nervous or were you excited? If you're going to succeed in life, you must perform well in high-pressure situations. That's where the opportunities lie. So the question is, how well do you perform under pressure? Well, Janine, you and I are both introverts, and we both dislike being the focus of attention.
Yes.
I, in particular, had a fear of public speaking for the first 10 years of my career and recognized that as being a detriment to my career. So I spent a lot of time learning tools and techniques to help me perform better when public speaking.
Well, Ken, that's actually has a name. It's called glossophobia, and you're not alone. About 75% of people report a fear of public speaking as one of their top fears. It's right up there with the fear of dying. What I always find interesting is, in these high pressure situations, how some people do tend to perform well or thrive, but on other occasions might choke and not do so well. So today what we want to do is share some strategies and science behind performing your best under these high pressure situations.
Yeah. So the question is really 3. How do I turn on my confidence? How do I crush my fears? How do I access my best self to unlock my peak performance? So what we'll cover in today's discussion is how our brains and bodies operate under stress, what we really fear, how biases and stereotypes can affect our performance, discovering our best self, identifying our strengths, learning how to leverage our strengths, and then we'll cover some exercises, and finally we'll preview the Best Self Workshop series. So Janine, what is a physical response to a stressful situation?
Okay, well, let's Let's take a stressful situation that we all probably understand and can relate to, like a job interview. It's a high stakes situation. We're being judged. We want to make a good impression. We want the job. And in this situation, you're likely to experience your heart beating rapidly, your breathing speed up, become more shallow. You might begin to sweat, maybe even get dry mouth or stomach aches. So people call that, getting butterflies in their stomach.
Right. It's important for people to understand that this is perfectly normal. Not feeling this way actually would be cause for concern.
Yes, but if we perceive this emotional arousal as fear, so the interview makes us feel scared or nervous, then our body wants to react with that fight, flight, or freeze response. You may really want to just get up from the interview chair and run screaming from the room, or conversely, you may feel somewhat paralyzed and not be able to think.
Right. We need this fight, flight, or freeze response, though, when we're in physical danger, clearly. But as we know, it can be detrimental when we're in a job interview. So the question is, can you control your stress response?
Yes, we can, but it's not how you might expect. And to help with that, before I explain it further, I want to dispel a couple of common myths that we have surrounding stress in our society. First of all, we tend to believe that an ideal life would be a stress-free life. But think about what your top life stressors are. Probably job, work, school, family, and friends. If you're parents, kids provide a reliable source of stress, I have found.
Yeah.
But now think about what makes your life meaningful and really worth living. I'm imagining that the same kinds of things come to your mind, your job, your friends, and your family. Well, this is the paradox of stress. It turns out that across both societies and individuals, the stress is highly associated with our overall levels of joy, our happiness, our satisfaction in life, and our general well-being. And that takes me to our second myth, which is nicely summed up by the phrase, keep calm and carry on. So in other words, we need to just calm down, relax, and get rid of the stress.
Well, let's face it, the keep calm and carry on advice never works.
Right. Research says that attempting to calm ourselves in the face of something that's important to us can actually increase the stress we feel and further hinder our performance.
So the key to controlling our stress response is simply understanding that perception alters reality.
Yes, the key is how we think about the stress we're experiencing. How are we interpreting the situation?
So when we interpret a situation, there's basically a fork in the road. You can either take the positive road or take the negative road. And the fact is you actually need your stress energy to perform better. So how we think about things actually impacts us much more than we actually realize.
Yeah, so if we go back to the job interview example, how you think about your stress in that situation is going to impact your performance. Research suggests that if you acknowledge that the situation, the job interview, is important to you, and you then interpret your body's stress signals or your arousal signals that we just talked about as giving you the energy to rise to the challenge, you can shift from being nervous or scared in that situation to being excited and energized. And this is going to result in better performance and coming across in a better light. And our brain is really very efficient at thinking and has many default ways of responding to the things that we encounter. And we call these defaults mindsets. Mm-hmm. And these are really our beliefs or our attitudes or assumptions about anything.
Well, let's give an example.
Okay, a good example that comes to mind is an aging mindset. So right now, if I flashed a photo of an elderly woman on your screen, without much conscious effort or awareness, you would in probably a split second have an impression of her based on your aging mindset or your beliefs, your attitudes and assumptions about aging. So for instance, you might think of qualities like generous, wise, loving, patient. Those would all represent a positive mindset of aging. Or your thoughts may reflect a more negative aging mindset, thinking things like incompetent, bad driver, slow, sedentary, grouchy. You get the picture. But what's really fascinating about this mindset research is that in the case of aging mindset, studies show that those who beliefs are more positive actually live longer. So your aging mindset is actually associated with your longevity. So if you have a more positive mindset, results in living about 8 years on average longer than a person with a more negative mindset about aging.
So there is a mind-body connection, and altering our mindset can have a positive impact on our behavior as well as our mental and physical well-being. So this is important. Your response to stress is not only mental, it's physical as well.
Right, so our endocrine system is working all the time to influence our hormone levels and basically dictate our hormones being released.
Right.
And they fluctuate throughout the day for various reasons. But our hormones can impact our emotional, our physical, and our cognitive states. But the good news is we do have influence over our hormones and our body chemistry. So stressful situations can cause both an emotional response and a physiological response, kind of like we talked about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
But what isn't widely known is that emotional psychological response, whether you're feeling fear or excited, that actually impacts our hormone levels. So a typical stress response is going to increase our levels of cortisol and adrenaline. These are going to give us focus and energy, and also divert energy away from other systems like digestion, our immune functioning and growth, to make more resources available for us to act.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also other neurohormones such as oxytocin is one, and DHEA, which is a precursor to testosterone. Those will also increase in our stress response. And interestingly, from a cardiovascular perspective, blood flow is also affected. So in the fight, flight, or freeze response, our blood vessels constrict. So in case we're injured, we don't bleed out all over the place. But in the challenge response to stress, our blood vessels actually open up. So instead of constricting, they open up, which allows more oxygen to reach our brain. And while we still have elevated cortisol and adrenaline to give us the energy to act, in this challenge response, what's different is our DHEA becomes higher than our cortisol level. And this ends up blocking the negative impact of the cortisol on the body. And it's actually a healthy response to stress, and it puts us in a state to learn and perform better.
So understanding and utilizing the power of this mind-body connection is the key to unlocking and reaching our full potential. We'll cover specific techniques to help you perform better in your Best Self Workshop series, but there's going to be more on that in just a few minutes. But for now, just breathe. One of the stress response symptoms is shallow breathing, or sometimes we hold our breath altogether. This is the worst thing for us to do because not only do we need oxygen to live, we need it to perform at our best. So here's a quick exercise for you to do the next time you're in a stressful situation. Take a slow, deep breath through your nose to the count of 3. It should be deep enough to fill the bottom of your lungs. And then slowly exhale through your mouth to the count of 5. You should actually feel a positive physiological change in your body from this exercise.
And this is also a perfect opportunity to pause and just reflect on your thinking, check your mindset, and how you can view the situation in front of you as being a challenge.
So Janine, this is my favorite slide.
I love this slide.
So what causes this physical and mental response to stress?
Well, the part of our brain responsible for activating the stress response really hasn't evolved in any measurable way over many thousands of years. So in effect, we still have our caveman brain today. The fight, flight, or freeze response is helpful to evade a saber-toothed tiger, but it's really not helpful in response to taking a test or going to a job interview or really any other modern day, everyday stressor, even getting stuck in traffic. And so to explain this a little bit better, it helps to think of our brain as being subdivided into 3 specialized brains: the reptilian, the emotional, and the thinking brain. And the first one is really the brainstem, and we refer to it as the reptilian brain. It's the oldest of the 3. It controls our body's vital functions like heart rate, breathing, body temperature, balance. It's stuff we don't have actual conscious control over. And the emotional brain, which is actually involved in our stress response, like the brainstem, is fully developed at birth. It hasn't changed much since our caveman days. It actually is the area of the brain kind of in the center and right above the brainstem. And this is where we process all incoming information from our senses, and also emotions, reward seeking, and memories are generated in this area of the brain. And finally, the newest part of our brain, at least in evolutionary terms, is the thinking brain, which is predominantly in the frontal lobe, which is behind the forehead. This houses our conscious thoughts, our working memory. It directs our attention. It's responsible for giving us our sense of self. So a lot of your personality resides in this area. So this part of the brain is the last to fully develop. It doesn't actually reach full maturity until our late 20s, early 30s.
I think we've seen that a little bit with our kids.
Yes, we see this in adolescence. What were they thinking? Oh, they weren't.
They weren't.
So when our emotional brain responds to a stressful event, It engages the sympathetic nervous system and it causes arousal. How we interpret or think about that arousal actually can change or alter our physiological profile. So again, if we have that fight or flight response, we have high levels of cortisol, adrenaline, increase in inflammation, and our blood vessels restrict. This is definitely what you want to have happen if you're being attacked by a saber-toothed tiger, but it's really an unhealthy profile if it's done chronically. So if we can recognize that our life is not on the line in situations like a job interview or a traffic jam, and we interpret our body's symptoms as being helpful and energizing, then we get a reduction in cortisol, a decrease in inflammation in blood, and the blood vessels open up and expand, which allows more of that oxygen-rich blood to reach the brain. In this state, we are more open to our surroundings. We're not as laser focused on the threat, and this is a much healthier arousal state to be in.
In modern day life, or at least the business situations we're discussing today, we're not in fear of our life. However, the fear we experience in public speaking, job interviews, presentations, and tests is very real, and it can be paralyzing. So Dr. Carl Albrecht wrote a wonderful article outlining the 5 fears we all share. We all fear life and limb, for instance, which are the first 2 fears that he calls extinction and mutilation. But the next 3 fears are all associated with social dynamics. The first is loss of autonomy. Next is separation. Third, ego death. So what is loss of autonomy? It's fear of losing control. And Janine, I think the example that you and I would use is when you're teaching, when you're in front of your class, or when I'm speaking in public, one of the fears that I have at least is losing control of the audience.
Absolutely.
The next is separation, which is fear of abandonment and rejection. And an example of that is actually in medieval times, one rather severe punishment was excommunication or banishment, where somebody would be separated from their group, from their family and friends. And then the third, of course, is ego death, which is fear of humiliation. And again, I think anytime we're in a social situation or we're speaking in front of a group, there's always that little fear in the back of our head that we're going to humiliate ourselves.
Yeah, and this fear of humiliation is important because our reality is really just experienced as an extension of ourselves. So our brain is wired to support all this through what we have, I guess we call them unconscious biases. Mm-hmm. So one of these biases would be the illusion of transparency. And that's a tendency to overestimate the extent that others can read our internal state. So for example, if you're feeling really nervous in a meeting, or you've become really irritated with a coworker, you may believe that your feelings are leaking out all over the place and obvious to everyone. But in fact, studies show that this generally is not the case at all.
Right. Here's a little tip. We are not scrutinized at a heavy level. So years ago, I took a class on ideation facilitation. And our instructor taught us that people lose focus on the speaker about every 17 seconds. That means every so often, a thought will pop into their head and kind of take them away from the speaker. And that thought could be anything from, hey, I need to send an email to my boss, to, am I prepared for my next meeting? Or, hey, my kid's got a soccer match this afternoon, right? So there are lots of opportunities for people to think about things other than what you're saying, and they do it quite often. Now, when I learned that in the class, there were no smartphones or not as many mobile devices around. So that 17 seconds, Janine, I would bet is much shorter time now. As you know, being a teacher.
Yeah, from what I've seen in the classroom, I'm going to go with 3-5 seconds maybe.
So, Janine, we are social animals.
Yes, our thoughts and feelings and our behaviors are highly influenced by other people. So we're social animals. Our brains are literally wired for connection to others. Human beings need each other to learn, to grow, and actually to survive.
These social interactions and how others perceive us are actually the genesis of our fears. Remember the loss of autonomy and separation and ego death? Well, these are all perceived threats based on social interaction.
Yeah, and another unconscious bias that demonstrates the power of social influence is the spotlight effect. So this is feeling as if everybody is watching you and judging you, and it happens particularly when we feel like we've done something that might be humiliating or embarrassing. But it turns out that it's really not as important to other people as it is to us.
So there is reason for concern. How we're perceived by others matters a lot. Again, our caveman brains are wired to make quick judgments about anything new or novel. That includes other people. We make snap judgments about people every time we meet someone new. These judgments are made in less than 1/10 of 1 second, and they're made at an unconscious level. Now, here's the kicker. After we make that initial judgment about somebody, we then listen for proof that confirms our initial impression.
It's so true.
So our brains evolved to be efficient cognitive processing machines by using cognitive shortcuts like biases and stereotypes.
Yeah, our brain is amazing and efficient, but it does use shortcuts like biases and stereotypes you just mentioned. Or honestly, we would never make it out of the house in the morning if
Right.
it didn't. But these shortcuts come with both an upside and a downside. We usually think of biases and stereotypes as being a bad thing, and sometimes they are. They lead us to faulty or unfair conclusions. But more often, these shortcuts help us. These shortcuts in thinking help us to make quick and efficient decisions about how to respond to both familiar things and unfamiliar things that happen to us.
Stereotyping can be helpful. It provides, like you said, Janine, quick information for decision making, but we can overgeneralize, leading to mistakes. Another way stereotypes are harmful, though, is when we are associated with a stereotyped group. This can unconsciously undermine our performance, and this is called stereotype threat.
Right. So we all have parts of our identity that are negatively stereotyped. And stereotype threat happens when we're faced with an important situation, something we care about, where that negative stereotype is relevant and we expect, even unconsciously, to be evaluated or judged based on that stereotype.
And just to give you a couple of examples of some of the stereotype groups, there is, of course, gender and skin color and sexual orientation. But many people may not realize that there's also height and weight and attractiveness and accent. By the way, I received on Facebook, I received a reply from a lady that mentioned that she's afraid to speak publicly because of her accent. There's also religion and socioeconomic background. There's birthplace or place of origin. There's education. Janine, basically any way we can subdivide each other, there is the potential for stereotype threat.
Absolutely, the potential is there. But let me give you a pretty common example. A lot of studies show that women oftentimes experience stereotype threat when being evaluated in math. So it's a well-known stereotype that poor math performance is expected from or associated with women, and we get that message pretty early in our education. But this stereotype in turn hinders women's performance in math in comparison to equally qualified men. And there's been a lot of research by Claude Steele and Stanford in this area, looking especially at this area in math with women. And what his study shows that when equally qualified men and women are given a challenging math test, the women underperform and score lower than the men. Yet the fascinating part was they were actually able to eliminate that stereotype threat by giving a simple instruction to the women prior to the test. And the instruction was basically to assure them that even though the stereotype exists, that men outperform women on math tests, that's not true for this particular test. On this test, men and women perform equally. And with that really seemingly simple instruction, the women's performance rose to match that of the men. And they no longer viewed the frustration they were experiencing as evidence that they were confirming that negative stereotype.
So once again, perception affects our reality. Our thoughts can influence our physiological reaction to a situation, and our physiology can influence our thoughts. And we'll cover this in depth in our second workshop of our Best Self Workshop series. That's titled the Body Language and Nonverbal Communication Workshop. We'll cover tools and techniques to help you access your best self in high-stress situation using body language. So, Janine, what do we do with all this information? The point of this discussion, obviously, is how do we access our best self when the pressure is on? So let's begin with the ideal in mind. I'd like you watching this webinar to remember a situation when you are at your very best. All right, this is an example of our ideal state. And the question is, when you remember that special situation, how did you feel? Were you confident? Did you feel talented? Did you feel empowered? Did you feel bold? Our goal is to access this feeling in other high-pressure situations. And let me give you an example of when I accessed my best self. Years ago, I facilitated a brand positioning workshop for a technology company. I put a lot of work mapping out the entire day. I had exercises worked out. I did pre-reads and handouts and you name it. In the very first hour of the work session itself, we uncovered some opportunities to increase the company's sales. At that very moment, the CEO decided to use the remaining time fleshing out these ideas. I basically had to rework the entire workshop on the fly. But Janine, I have to tell you, something clicked in me, and at that moment, I began to operate in the zone. Yeah, I felt a lot of pressure to provide these people with value, and I certainly did not want to look foolish. But I harnessed that stress energy and used it to my advantage. I knew that my 2 decades of training and experience were exactly what these people needed to facilitate this work session. So I trusted myself in the moment. The workshop itself went great. Everybody was engaged, and we accomplished a lot. My client was ecstatic over the income. But more importantly, and what I want you guys viewing this webinar at home to realize is when I was in that moment, I felt energized. I felt alive. I was creative. I felt intelligent. I felt valuable. And more importantly, I felt valued by others.
Well, I love your example. Mine's a little different from your experience. For me, it was more of a personal watershed moment that occurred about 20 years ago when I had to defend my dissertation research in order to get my doctoral degree. And prior to that defense, I had basically been a professional student for about 10 years. Yeah, everything was about to change though. And a lot was riding on that 160, 90-minute presentation. You know, my degree, my future, my self-esteem, it was all kind of right there. So I stood there in front of my department faculty and my fellow graduate students, and I explained, defended, fielded questions on my research. And I remember being really nervous, but I don't remember being scared. I knew no one on the face of the planet knew my research the way I did. I was really excited to share it, and I was really excited for what was going to come next in my life. It felt like kind of akin to an out-of-body experience. Mm-hmm. I was very, very prepared for, you know, what I was going to do there. It reminded me, I used to play guitar and sing publicly. And when you know something so well, it just comes very easily to you. And I just remember feeling like I was on top of the world when it was over. And for me, that was the beginning of kind of harnessing that feeling. Right. And I've been cultivating it for, you know, the last 10, 15 years.
And that's really the goal, isn't it? To get to a point where we can access our best selves in critical situations. You happen to live in the zone probably more than most people. And that's what we're trying to teach through this 3-part webinar series. So I like to say your best self comes out when you're utilizing your strengths. And when you're utilizing your strengths, that's when you'll access your best self. So that leads us to the big question, which is, what are your character strengths?
If you find this to be a difficult question, I wouldn't be surprised, because I found that a lot of people struggle with naming their strengths. And I'm wondering if maybe weaknesses popped into your head initially when you got asked this question?
Yeah, and I'd say let's do a quick poll just for fun. Okay. In the Q&A button where you're allowed to ask questions, if you would, if you feel confident, you know what your strengths are, just type in yes, and then if you know what your number 1 strength is, go ahead and type that in as well, and we'll revisit this in a few minutes. But Janine, explain to us why it's important to know about this about yourself.
Well, we just tend to feel unhappy and not like things that tap into our weaknesses. Right. And there's a really strong relationship that we find between utilizing our strengths to their full extent and overall, you know, success and life satisfaction.
Let's give an example. Let's share our strengths and how that helped us with our situations earlier, right? So my strengths are, I love to learn, I'm creative, I excel at critical thinking, I love to teach, and I have a good sense of humor. So if you think about the story that I gave about that ideation session that I facilitated, I was in the zone in that branding workshop because I love to learn. I was able to access 20 years of learning in order to help those people in the moment, right? I had to come up with new exercises on the fly, so I had to access my creativity. The point of what we were trying to do after that first hour was flesh out these ideas to grow this business. So I was able to think critically. And then, of course, if you're a facilitator, I think you've got a little bit of teacher in you. You know, you love to teach. It goes hand in hand. And then finally, when you're making something up on the fly, it doesn't always go smoothly. So while it was a success, there were glitches in the system, and I had to have a good sense of humor about that, right? Because as the facilitator, I didn't want to get too caught up in the mistakes that were being made from time to time. And frankly, I think that made the audience feel more at ease as well.
Right. Oh, yeah. I'm thinking back to my dissertation defense, and I think I was using my love of learning. Obviously, if I was a professional student for 10 years, I like to learn. And that was probably the first insight I had into, I kind of like teaching. My conscientiousness definitely played a role. I'm very organized, prepared. So you definitely have that in your back pocket. My critical and analytic thinking skills came into play in answering and fielding questions. Mm-hmm. And I think maybe even more than anything else, my interpersonal skills to engage my audience, sort of like you said, I needed to put myself at ease in that situation. Right. And I needed to put them at ease and make it take a high stakes situation and bring it down to something we can all sit through and enjoy and survive.
So Janine, you came up with this little exercise to help people identify their character strengths, because while some people may know one or two, they may not know all of their character strengths.
Yeah, so this is really just about being aware or mindful of your strengths. So if you don't know what yours are, it's not obvious to you, just try before you go to bed each night, write down 3 things that you like about yourself that happened during the day. And then read that list when you get out of bed in the morning, just to remind yourself. And what you'll find is after the days go by and weeks, you'll start to see patterns emerge, and this is going to tell you what your strengths are. Should we see what did anybody put their strengths in?
Let's see.
Asked them?
Yeah. Oh, wait. All right. Kelly says, yes, my number 1 strength is creativity. Very good. And then we really had a lot of people who couldn't identify their strengths. So this exercise is actually up. And another person said they're very organized.
Awesome.
We could use their help.
Yeah. Where's that button?
So this slide is perfect, right? So I mentioned that I enjoy learning, and I have taken all of these personality tests. If you have an interest to learn more about your character strengths, I recommend all of these. They're very different. They come from different perspectives. I enjoyed taking all of them and learning more about myself and my personality. We're going to send an email out to you with links to all of these resources. So don't worry about taking notes or anything if you're interested in taking this. We're going to send those out to you in an email separately. But the first is the VIA Institute on Character, which is sponsored by the University of Pennsylvania. It's a free online test. The next is 16 Personalities, which again is a free online test. Many people, especially in business, I think, have learned about the Strengths Finder book written by Tom Rath. You purchase the book, and then he provides you with a code so you can take the personality test online. Then, of course, there's Myers-Briggs, which I think most people that I know have taken Myers-Briggs at some point in their life.
Mm-hmm. What are you?
I'm an INTJ.
Oh, I'm an INFJ. So you're thinking and I'm feeling.
That's why we're a great team here. And then the last on this list is the Berkman method. And I just took this a couple weeks ago and really enjoyed it. I learned a lot about myself. It was very thorough. My consultant was Todd McCarty, and I'll provide you with his information if you would like to take the Berkman method. So we'll cover specific techniques to access your best self in our Best Self Workshop series, and more on that in just a few minutes. But these are things you can do right now.
Right. It's important to begin to pay attention to your relationship with stress and try to cultivate a positive stress mindset by reframing the situation you find yourself in. So first, you want to acknowledge the stress when you experience it. Remind yourself that when you're feeling that arousal response we talked about earlier, it's because there's something important or something you really care about in front of you. And it's a perfect opportunity also to take that pause and check your breathing at that point. And you want to choose to perceive the situation as a challenge rather than a threat. So ask, what are you thinking to yourself? Are you excited? And use the arousal energy the stress gives you to meet the challenge before you leverage your stress.
So we have good news. If you're joining us today, we're going to provide you with some free bonuses. We're going to offer you 2 interactive PDFs to help you identify and leverage your character strengths. The first is the Personal Strengths Diary, which will help you identify how often you use your strengths, how you feel when you use them, and then how do they help you accomplish your task. The next is the Character Strengths Action Plan. This is to help you identify opportunities throughout the day or week where you will intentionally employ your strengths. You'll write these down and then you'll add them to your calendar because, like Janine, we want to get closer to living every single day in the zone. So we've talked about the tools and techniques that we are going to provide in our 3-part workshop series. And I want to walk you through some of the details of the series. The first workshop is titled Using Mental Cues to Access Your Best Self. And what we'll cover in this workshop is how to identify your best self, how to use stress to build confidence, what to do when the past affects your present, and then, of course, how to improve your mental game. Part 2 is using body language to access your best self. And what we'll cover in this workshop is how body language communicates to others, and this is very important, when to use body language techniques, how to improve your physical game, and then it's important to understand how body language affects your body chemistry and your state of mind. We'll cover that as well. And there's a lot of science behind how body language affects your best self. And then finally, part 3 is creating your personal brand image. Now you might ask, why would we have this in a best self workshop series? Well, because it's easier to access your best self when others believe in you. The goal is to influence others to receive and accept and even expect your best self in crucial situations. So what we'll cover in this is the power of first impressions. We'll talk about how to set the bar high, the reality of stereotyping and how we can overcome it, and then how to improve your personal brand image, of course. Now, what's the timing of these? These are all going to be live workshops. The first will take place, the Mental Cues will take place on Friday, July 15th at 12 p.m. noon Eastern Time. The second will be Using Body Language to Access Your Best Self, take place on July 22nd, again at noon. And the third, Creating Your Personal Brand Image, will take place on Friday, July 29th at noon. Now, it's important to know that we will be offering a Q&A at the end of each one of these work sessions. And if you're unable to attend, if you sign up and you can't attend, we will offer the recordings to you after the work session. So no worries, you'll have access to the information and the tools that we'll walk you through. So what is the value of all this information? Well, for our time in the 3 different workshops, that's worth just under $1,000. All right, we're going to provide workbooks for each one of the 3 sessions. Next, we're going to provide you with the Personal Strengths Diary that I just mentioned and the Character Strengths Action Plan that I just mentioned for free for joining us today. And then we're going to give you access to a private Facebook group. And the value of all that totals to just over $1,300. However, if you purchase the full series in the next 7 days, we're going to offer all 3 workshops, plus the workbooks, plus the Personal Strengths Diary, plus the Character Strengths Action Plan, and access to the private Facebook group for only $249. Now again, we want you to sign up today. Space is limited, and this $249 package cost is only going to happen over the next 7 days. Now, if one of those workshops intrigued you and you just wanted to participate in one of them, the cost for an individual workshop is only $99. Now, with that, you'll get the workbook for that workshop, and you'll have access to the private Facebook group. So we really encourage you to sign up today. We'll send out a couple of email communications with the information we told you that we would provide you, along with a link to sign up. Do it today before you forget. Take advantage of the savings. as I like to say, today is the day to be your best self, Janine.
I
So
like
enrollment begins right now. Space is limited. Sign up today. We encourage you. And frankly, I just love this quote, which is, do not go where the path may lead. Go instead where there is no path and leave your own trail.
That's fabulous.
I like that one. All right. So are you ready to do some Q&A?
I am ready to do some Q&A.
All right.
Do we have some cues?
Let's see if we have some cues. Let's see, we did have a question here that was, will you be offering this series, later in the year? And the answer to that is Janine and I are actually working on our next webinar series, which is about managing millennials. And which is very intriguing to a lot of people, and we have a lot of answers for people. And then we have another series after that in the queue for millennials, which will be about how to get the most out of their career. So we have 2 more workshops that we're working on. We can't promise that we will come back to this one by the end of the year, but that was a good question. So we encourage you to sign up today. Let's see, there's another question here. What if I'm an extrovert? Will this stuff work for me?
Oh, yes. It works for everybody.
Yeah.
It really does. So even though we're both introverts, the basic difference between an introvert and extrovert, we could actually do a whole webinar on this.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic difference is where you get your energy from. So introverts actually recharge by themselves, and extroverts look for other people to recharge. That's where they're getting their energy. So what might be difference between an introvert and extrovert with the stuff we talked about today is maybe strengths might be different between those people, but this applies to anybody, any personality type. It's getting to know yourself and paying attention to yourself, regardless of whether you're an introvert or extrovert.
Right. So we have a question, how do I sign up and learn about future workshops? Well, if you access our website, there's an opportunity to sign up for our newsletter, e-newsletter. So we'll provide you with information about future workshops as they come up, or more information about this workshop and the ability to sign up for it right now. It says, I'm a very soft talker. How can I make myself seem more confident? We're actually going to cover that in the second webinar on body language. So part of nonverbal communication actually is the tone of your voice and how you use your voice. So it's not what's being said, but again, how something's being said. And we have tools and techniques that can help you overcome that and hopefully give you more confidence when you are speaking in a proper tone to be heard and recognized.
I think all this stuff is going to feed into that, because really the underlying commonality is confidence.
Right.
And so understanding your strengths, being able to manage your stress in a productive way, and then knowing all these techniques we're going to cover in future workshops, all of that taken together,
right,
that's going to make a big difference.
So let's see, we have another good question. I have a job interview. How can I be ready? I'll let you start, because we've talked about this before, and you're the queen of preparation.
Yeah, because again, I'm going to go back to confidence. So your confidence is going to be directly related to your preparation. And there's something called self-efficacy, how well you believe you can do something. So the more prepared you are, the more you're going to believe that you can do this. And again, if you're accessing your strengths and you're using those, and you can communicate those well in an interview, which some people have a difficult time doing because you've actually given it some thought, those things are all going to give you a leg up.
Right. Now we're going to give specific tools and techniques, both mental and physical, and as part of your personal brand identity in our workshop series. So those you can actually take with you to access before and during the interview to help you knock that thing out of the ballpark. But here's the thing, I highly recommend that you sign up for all 3 of our workshops, because this information really builds on itself, and you'll have a better understanding holistically of accessing your best self if you've taken all 3 workshops.
And I always tell my students, I like to give aha moments where you hear something that is like, oh my gosh, that makes like huge sense now, but I didn't know it before. So I hope to fill these next workshops with just a bunch of aha moments for everybody.
And we will. And it's funny, you and I have talked about this before. I wish I had this information 20 years ago.
Oh, I know.
It would have made my first 10 years of my career much, much easier.
Which is why I'm working with students, because I'm trying to give them some of this information now so that they can utilize. Because some of it you can figure out on your own, but sometimes it's the hard way.
Right. That's right.
And if you don't have to do it the hard way.
Well, I think you'll miss out on opportunities when you make those mistakes early on.
Yeah, absolutely.
So hopefully we can get people over the hump early so they can leverage and take advantage of opportunities when they have them. Oh, Karen says, I'm signing up right now. Thank you, Karen.
Awesome.
We have a nice compliment from an anonymous viewer. It says, you guys are awesome. Thanks for sharing this information. I'm signing up today. Thank you. Another person says, this is great. So lots of compliments. Those are all positive strokes. Thank you.
Thank you, people we can't see.
Yeah. So we'll wait another minute and see if we get any other questions. And if not, again, thank you for joining us today. We really, really enjoyed sharing this information, and we look forward to conducting all three of our workshops coming up.
Yeah, it's really great if you spend your time with us, because time is precious.
Time is precious. Well, let's see. I don't see any other questions. So everybody, thanks again for participating. We appreciate your questions and your engagement, and we look forward to you joining our next 3 workshops.
Oh, and pass the word.
Yeah, please pass the word along.
Thank you, everybody.